As I sat in the front seat of the van, the world outside felt like it was spiraling into chaos. My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and concern, reflecting the turmoil brewing within me. The small alarms that had been ringing in my head all week, subtle yet persistent, proved to be accurate predictions of deeper issues. I had brushed them aside, dismissing the unease as mere overthinking. But something had been undeniably amiss since last Tuesday evening. That was when Sally dropped the bombshell that she had consulted a doctor regarding a yeast infection she had developed. The doctor prescribed medication and advised her to avoid any close intimacy for at least a week. When she shared this news, her tone lacked conviction, and I found myself questioning the sincerity of her words. After all, it had been years since she had faced a yeast infection, and she was usually meticulous about self-care to prevent such occurrences. Yet, I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to the story. A few more warning signals were echoing in the recesses of my mind. I shook my head, trying to silence those nagging thoughts, but they continued to persist. Earlier that week, likely on the very day she spent with him, I had noticed a marked change in her demeanor during dinner. She seemed entirely different, distant even. That evening, after an uncomfortable meal filled with silences and evasions, Sally excused herself and headed for the bedroom to lie down. I settled in front of the television, mindlessly flipping through channels for a couple of hours, but even mindless entertainment couldn't dispel the unease that had settled over me. When I finally retired to bed, expecting to find solace, I was instead met with an icy atmosphere. As I climbed into bed, I noticed Sally was awake but unresponsive. The lights were turned off, and my attempt to wish her good night was met with silence. More alarm bells rang in my head, yet I continued to ignore the signs. Throughout the week, her aloofness persisted, leaving me perplexed. I made several attempts to engage her, hoping to uncover what was troubling her. However, she skillfully evaded my questions, providing only vague responses that only deepened my concerns. I began to rationalize her behavior, attributing it to her yeast infection and the physical discomfort that accompanied her menstrual cycle. Even with my busy work week, I felt compelled to reach out to her. On Thursday morning, just before lunch, I called her, hoping to invite her to lunch as we had done so many times before. The absence of her voice on the other end felt particularly unsettling. She was usually within reach of her phone, so the lack of response struck me as odd. Choosing not to leave a voicemail, I called again, the alarm bells ringing louder in my mind. Whatever was troubling Sally needed to be addressed directly. Determined to tackle the underlying issues, I resolved that this weekend would be an opportunity for us to escape together, to find some quality time to discuss the state of our relationship. We needed to engage in one of those profound conversations that would reveal the truths we both had been avoiding. In my mind, I toyed with the idea of confessing my past indiscretion, vowing to her that I would never stray again, provided the circumstances were right. However, everything took an unexpected turn when Sally revealed that she was fully aware of my affair with Tina and the immense pain I had caused her. Her confrontation was shocking, filled with the vindictive energy of someone who had been hurt and was now seeking retribution. In a twisted echo of my past betrayal, she had orchestrated her own affair as payback for my infidelity. As I sat in the van, my mind was consumed with regret. The entire situation spiraled from my moment of weakness, which had seduced me into closeness with another woman. Sally had discovered the truth through an email from Tina, uncovering my betrayal without ever confronting me directly. Instead, she chose to retaliate by embarking on her own affair, cleverly distancing herself from me while cloaking her actions under the guise of needing space due to her infection. This revelation made me realize that she could have confronted me, demanding my confession and holding the power to impose penance on me for my betrayal. I could have poured my heart out to her, sharing how sick I felt on returning from that week-long project at the resort, battling the urge to confess my wrongdoing right then and there. But I had refrained, thinking I was sparing her feelings by keeping silent. I mistakenly believed that the incident would fade into the background, forgotten by both Tina and me. But now, the gravity of our situation loomed larger than ever, leaving me to confront the consequences of my choices. I had always believed that there was no need to bring unnecessary pain into Sally's life. Our situation stemmed from a one-time mistake, one I had never intended to repeat. Rather than laying bare the truth about my indiscretion, I made the decision to conceal it from her, convinced that it was better for both of us. However, that choice backfired. The truth emerged unexpectedly, right when I least anticipated it. Now, our marriage was in complete chaos, unraveling at the seams, and its future hung in the balance, clouded with uncertainty. As I grappled with the ramifications of what had transpired, the more I realized that Sally's response had escalated far beyond what I had ever imagined. It felt as though she had taken the concept of revenge to an unnecessary level, seemingly intent on paying me back in a way that extended well beyond simple vindication. I had never sought to intentionally hurt her with my moment of weakness. My actions did not carry the same calculated intent as the one she was now unleashing upon me. The irony of it all struck me. While I had slipped up during a moment far away from our home, she had not needed to sit idle in a parking lot, aware of my proximity to another woman. My indiscretion had happened in the shadows, out of her sight and knowledge. In contrast, her decisions felt premeditated and orchestrated to leave a profound impact on me. It became painfully evident that her actions were not just a way to rectify what I had done, they were rooted in a desire to inflict deep emotional wounds. Perhaps she had even found a way to pursue a new relationship, driven by a sense of thrill and excitement as she spent time with another man. Sally had voiced how different and exhilarating it all seemed to her, using my betrayal as an easy excuse for her own infidelity. She directly placed the blame on me, asserting that my actions had compelled her down this path. I struggled with the weight of her accusations. Yes, I had been unfaithful, but not in the spiteful way she was retaliating against me. My mind raced to comprehend why she felt the need to prolong this destructive cycle even after she had apparently exacted her revenge in her mind. Why could she not simply stop and let the matter rest? Why did she feel compelled to draw me into the nightmare of her affair, forcing me to witness the pain and humiliation firsthand? Just learning about her infidelity would have been a punishment enough for me, but it soon became clear that she desired my utter humiliation instead. The emotional toll of her actions over the past several days far overshadowed any harm my mistake had inflicted on our once sacred bond. Her need for revenge felt excessive, a decision made with the intent to destroy rather than heal. Even after her first encounter with another man, there remained a chance for us to mend what was broken, yet here I was, overwhelmed by despair and frustration. In a moment of turmoil, I found myself reaching for a pen and paper in the glove compartment of my van. I scrawled a note. The words, "Don't come home," were through echoing in my mind like a desperate plea. This felt like a turning point. The note seemed to scream at me, demanding I reconsider my drastic actions. Could I really go through with this? Could I truly walk away from someone I loved more than I could express? Yet, another thought began to gnaw at my mind. Did Sally love me as deeply as I loved her? If she did, why was she acting with such bitterness? Why did she continuously threaten our future together? With each passing moment, the dread of uncertainty settled heavy on my heart. Had she already resolved to end our marriage? Was her plan to return, proclaiming the finality of our love with a declaration that would shatter me completely? I felt humiliated just imagining the possibility. Resigned to confront this haunting reality, I exited the van and made my way back to the bar. I approached the bartender and handed him my note along with a $20 bill, instructing him to deliver it to Sally upon her return. His knowing glance suggested he understood the heavy weight of the situation without needing to read the note. "I'll give it to her as soon as she comes back," he assured me. As I stepped out of that establishment, a swell of despair crashed over me, enveloping me like an oppressive tide. My knees wobbled beneath me, and my mouth felt parched. Tears threatened to spill as I stumbled back to my van. Taking one last deep breath, I realized that leaving this parking lot might mean the end of everything I had known. Staying would only risk a deeper misery than I was already experiencing. As I drove away, the bar quickly faded from view, and tears streamed down my face. The journey home felt like a harrowing trek through a waking nightmare, an ordeal filled with uncertainty and heartache. Part of me wanted to turn around, to confront Sally and whatever twisted resolution she had in store for me. But now, I was just left with the weight of my choices, the shattering reality of our love hanging by a thread. My wounded pride acted as a barrier, suppressing the weak voice inside that whispered about the possibility of reconciliation. The reality sank in. What's done is done, and I could not undo the past. As I pulled into the driveway, my mind was a chaotic jumble of thoughts. A part of me clung tightly to memories of my wife and the life we had built together, filled with shared moments and dreams. Yet, the larger part quickly shifted focus toward the uncertain future that awaited me following this separation. I felt a rush of anxiety at the thought of the impending divorce. How could I ensure my safety and well-being during this tumultuous time? Concerns about the divorce process, living arrangements, and my overall protection flooded my mind. My instinct to organize kicked in, compelling me to prioritize my security in every sense. First and foremost, I recognized the need to protect myself physically and then legally. Securing the house and safeguarding our financial assets became urgent priorities. The idea of seeking a legal restraining order loomed in my mind as I mentally scoured my surroundings for what I could do immediately. Changing the locks on the house took precedence. It was essential to ensure that no one could enter without my permission. I hastily rifled through the phone book for a 24-hour locksmith, the urgency of my situation leaving little room for delay. Upon connecting with the locksmith, I explained the emergency and requested an immediate change of all the locks. A sense of relief washed over me when he agreed to come, albeit with a $100 surcharge for the late-night service. I accepted, providing him with my address and listening as he assured me he would arrive within the hour. As I waited, my thoughts turned to preventing Sally from entering the house, especially since she only had the clothes on her back after our confrontation. I hurried to the closet, retrieving our two largest suitcases despite their weight. Managing to haul both into the van, which was still considered her car, I parked it at the curb in front of our home. Leaving the keys on the front seat, I took the garage door opener with me, knowing that I needed to limit her access. Minutes later, the locksmith arrived as promised. He assessed the situation and informed me that changing all 5 locks would take about an hour. I nodded, reassuring him that he could let me know if he needed anything while I settled in front of the computer. He returned to his truck to gather the necessary tools, and as I sat alone with my thoughts, I began scrolling through my email archives. I was searching for the messages from Tina that Sally had mentioned, and to my dismay, they were all there. Each email confirmed the affair, including one I had unknowingly sent under my name, a message urging Tina to go away. It was unsettling to see the lack of response from Tina, a reminder that the affair had indeed ended. As I stared blankly at the screen, I found myself grappling with questions that gnawed at me. Why hadn't Sally confronted me directly about the incident with Tina? Why had she taken this destructive path of revenge? Was there something fundamentally wrong within our marriage that she hadn't felt free to discuss with me? Was this grand act of vengeance her way of trying to settle old scores and grievances? My mind spiraled with confusion and despair when the phone rang again. My instincts told me it was Sally. After several rings, the call went to voicemail. I activated the speakerphone, hearing her trembling voice pouring through the speaker. "Oh Peter, please pick up the phone. I know you're there. We need to talk. Please don't end our marriage like this. Talk to me, Peter, please." The desperation in her tone was palpable, and I could sense the tears she struggled to hold back. However, I chose not to answer, letting the call end as quickly as it had begun. She likely believed that my guilt would compel me to let her manipulate me once more, but she was sorely mistaken. Once again, I returned to the computer with a newfound resolution. I accessed our bank accounts, my heart racing as I initiated the transfer of all funds from our joint accounts to an account solely in my name. The act felt both empowering and necessary in protecting my financial future. Once the transfer was complete, I contacted the 3 credit card companies, reporting the cards as stolen. When they inquired about issuing new cards, I nonchalantly told them I would call back later when I was ready for replacements. By the time I finished addressing my financial security, the locksmith was done with his task. He approached me with a couple of sets of keys for the new locks, a sense of finality settling in. This action meant that Sally couldn't re-enter the house without my explicit permission. As I resumed my seat at the computer, the phone rang again. I could see that it was Sally, the name flashing on the screen as I was still in the midst of typing up a message. This time, her voice was filled with even more desperation as she pleaded for my attention. Choosing to ignore her call, I focused on my thoughts, putting them into words on the screen, knowing I had to articulate my stance clearly. "Sally, please do not ring the doorbell or knock on the door. I will not answer. I have already packed 2 suitcases filled with your clothes and personal belongings, and they are sitting in the van parked at the curb. Just take the van and leave. Once you find a new place to live, send me your address, and I will arrange to send the rest of your things to you. You mentioned earlier tonight that we might go our separate ways, and you were right. Now that you have chosen your path, you can walk it alone. I too will find my own path to follow. Goodbye. This message comes from your ex-husband." After composing and carefully revising the message, I printed it out and taped the notice prominently to the front door. I was fully aware that Sally might find a way back and attempt a face-to-face confrontation, but I was resolute, that was not going to happen. I then walked around the house, methodically ensuring that all the windows and doors were securely locked. To eliminate any chance of interruption, I disconnected the front doorbell, preventing its annoying chime from bothering me throughout the night. With the house secured and my sense of safety established, I headed to the den where I poured myself a glass of Jack Daniels. As I settled into my lounge chair and took that first long sip, my hand began to tremble uncontrollably. I found it necessary to set the glass down on the table, realizing that my mind had suddenly become overwhelmed with emotional pain. Tears started to flow uncontrollably, as I felt trapped in a nightmare and desperately tried to wake myself up. However, every fiber of my being told me that this was not a dream but a harsh reality from which I could not escape. It was in that moment of despair that I remembered the envelope I had instinctively tucked into my pocket earlier, along with the wet underwear that had fallen out during my recent turmoil. I assumed the envelope contained a Dear John letter or some other form of communication that would further underscore the betrayal I was feeling. However, as I carefully opened the envelope, I was met with an unexpected surprise. Instead of a letter, there were photographs. There was no written message accompanying the images, just a dozen or so pictures that left no room for ambiguity. As I flipped through the photos, a sense of dread washed over me as I realized without a doubt that the subject of these images was my wife. In some of the pictures, I could see her face clearly, while in others, her designer stubble was visible. Each photograph that followed was more explicit and degrading than the last. It became unequivocally clear that they had been taken under the direction and influence of her lover. She was willingly submitting to his every command, fulfilling his desires while humiliating me in the process. I had to confront the harsh truth. This was not just a betrayal, it was her final act of degradation against my wounded male ego. I knew that if I did not muster the courage to end our marriage now, this humiliation would haunt me for years to come. My thoughts spiraled back to those incriminating photos and the underwear, both serving as undeniable proof of her infidelity. These items could potentially work in my favor if Sally chose to confront me during the divorce proceedings. With a heavy heart, I placed the photos and undergarments into a Ziploc bag and locked them away in a safe place. After securing the evidence, I returned to my computer and began to sift through the emails exchanged between Tina and Sally. One by one, I deleted each email, ensuring no trace of them remained. After carefully contemplating my next steps, I composed an email to Tina at her new address. In the message, I provided a detailed account of the situation, explaining that the last email she received was sent by Sally after she had discovered Tina's previous email to me. I shared the full story behind Sally's vengeful actions and expressed my intention to initiate divorce proceedings against her first thing on Monday. I took a moment to acknowledge the companionship I had shared with Tina during our brief 4 days together, suggesting that if she ever found herself in town, she should reach out to me. Lastly, I asked Tina if she would be willing to deny any involvement between us if Sally tried to use it against me. I made sure to request that she reply to my work email address, wanting to ensure that there would be no record of our communication on the home computer. After I sent the email, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation regarding the outcome. I pressed the delete button, erasing the message from my screen and memory. Tina was now faced with two choices. She could either act as a friend and deny any involvement if questioned or align herself with Sally, potentially turning against me. The latter option could create additional complications for me in the long run. Regardless, I believed it was worth the risk to gauge Tina's reaction and see where things would go from there. Tina's reaction to the shocking revelation that Sally had been the one to send her the last email instructing her to leave was something I had hoped would spark sympathy within her. The details of Sally's vengeful actions were laid bare, and I anticipated that this might evoke a deeper emotional response. Yet, as the evening wore on, I found myself at a loss for how to proceed. There was nothing more I could do that night except pour myself a generous glass of Jack Daniels, take a long, hot shower to wash away the day's anxieties, and eventually crawl into bed. As I settled into the quiet darkness, my thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a loud pounding on the front door. Even without glancing toward the noise, I instantly recognized it as Sally. Her voice soon followed, calling out to me, pleading for me to let her in. She begged for a conversation, and the relentless banging continued for an agonizing 15 minutes before suddenly stopping. I remained hidden in bed, the lights of the house turned off, cocooned in an unsettling silence. The only sounds breaking through the hush were the distant growl of a car engine starting and then fading away as it drove off into the night. With an anxious heart, I climbed out of bed and peered out the front window. The van was gone, leaving me in a state of confusion regarding her whereabouts, though, truthfully, I didn't care much at that moment. Sleep was elusive. I lay in our marital bed, a space once filled with passion and intimacy, now haunted by memories that felt both comforting and painful. When Sunday morning finally arrived, it greeted me with a heavy weight of exhaustion. I felt more drained than I had the night before, the stress and tension sinking deeper into my mind and body. Preparing a breakfast for just myself seemed futile, so I opted instead to dress and treat myself to a meal at IHOP. As I opened the front door to leave, I noticed a message Sally had left on the notice I had taped to the door. Her words read, "Please Peter, don't do this to us. Don't end our marriage this way. I still love you and want to remain your wife. Please, we need to sit down and talk this through. Please call me on my cell phone. We need to talk. Please, your loving wife, Sally." For a fleeting moment, as I absorbed her words, my defensive walls felt like they might crumble. However, my wounded ego quickly reasserted itself, strengthening those defenses. A small voice inside insisted there were too many unresolved questions, too much spite to simply brush aside, and too much hatred to navigate. That inner voice was right. My emotions, often swayed by my love for Sally, clashed with the undeniable truth: she had sought revenge that extended far beyond mere tit-for-tat. There was a darkness within her that I had never fully recognized. Rereading the note, it struck me that there was no apology present, no hint of contrition. No, "I'm sorry," anywhere in her request for reconciliation. This absence loomed large in my mind. If she truly wanted to mend our relationship, why was there no acknowledgement of wrongdoing? No attempt, however insincere, to express regret. Something had shifted in Sally's life the previous week, compelling her to escalate her actions in ways I struggled to understand. I realized that to grasp the tumult of her feelings and behaviors, I would have to reflect deeply on these questions. Breakfast at IHOP proved to be a pleasing distraction. My hunger was sated, and as I enjoyed my meal, my spirits began to lift slightly while I perused the morning newspaper. The news was as mundane as ever: the Middle East remained in turmoil, a perpetual cycle of conflict with no resolution in sight. As I read, a thought struck me: why was Sally so eager to retaliate rather than striving for reconciliation? Did her love for me run so shallow that my single mistake warranted such profound humiliation? When I settled my bill, the young woman at the cash register flashed me a warm smile and wished me a great day as she handed me my change. I couldn't help but wonder if this day would indeed turn out to be great, or if it would ultimately be just another chapter in a tumultuous saga. The drive home was marginally easier, my hunger satisfied and my mind slightly clearer. However, I was soon consumed by thoughts of the week ahead. Questions about the divorce loomed large: should I initiate it now, or would it be better to allow some time to pass? Just as I turned onto my street, my heart sank upon spotting Sally's van parked directly in front of our house. The sight filled me with dread. It was not an opportune moment for a face-to-face encounter with her. The uncertainty gnawed at me, unresolved and heavy, as I drove away from the house, the decision still unmade, the justifications for Sally's actions eluding me. I turned the car around swiftly, heading away from the confrontation, determined to avoid another drawn-out discussion that would only lead to more frustration. The thought of her waiting for me in that van crossed my mind. She could sit there, just like she expected me to wait in that bar the day before. It was a silent protest, a stubborn stand against the chaos of our relationship. I felt a sense of relief as I left her there, focusing solely on what I needed to do next. I directed my car toward the health club, knowing instinctively that a vigorous workout was just the distraction I craved. It would afford me a couple of hours to momentarily escape the challenges that loomed ahead. This physical exertion was my chance to clear my head, to sweat out the anxiety that had built up in my chest. As I arrived and changed into my workout gear, I took a deep breath, pushing the weight of my troubles aside. During my workout session, I ran into Frank Keene, an old college buddy. The sight of him was a welcome interruption. He had recently gone through a divorce himself, and I found myself drawn to his experience. Curiosity piqued, I approached him and began a conversation about the divorce process. Frank shared insights on the possible pitfalls to avoid, the emotional roller coaster to expect, and the steps he had taken. As our discussion unfolded, I gleaned invaluable information about navigating the complexities of filing for divorce. Before we parted ways, Frank handed me the contact details for his divorce attorney, offering a ray of hope amidst my confusion. Now, I had a clear direction for my next steps. I resolved to call this attorney the following Monday to initiate the necessary paperwork. It felt like a proactive move, a way to bolster my resolve for the unavoidable conversation I would soon have with Sally. After the gym, I opted for a light lunch, trying to keep my mind occupied before the evening ahead. Returning home that night, I was greeted by an empty driveway. Sally's van was absent. The absence brought a wave of relief, a moment of peace as I pulled into the garage and closed the door behind me. A quick check of the house revealed everything in order. However, upon opening the front door, I was met with another note from Sally, once again pleading for a conversation. Yet, I noted the absence of any apology or acknowledgement of her actions. It struck me that she was withholding that simple gesture to maintain control over the situation, leaving the weight of guilt squarely on my shoulders. It felt disheartening to see our once happy marriage reduced to a standoff where blame was being traded back and forth. The next day at the office, I made it clear to my receptionist, Anne, and my secretary, Alice, that I wouldn't be taking any calls from Sally and preferred not to see her if she showed up. Their expressions were a mix of confusion and concern, but I chose not to elaborate. Let them speculate. Soon enough, the news of my impending divorce would be common knowledge. As the morning progressed, around 10 o'clock, I made the call to the divorce attorney who had handled Frank's case. We scheduled an appointment for later that afternoon at 2 o'clock. With the clock ticking, I pushed through my usual tasks, skipping lunch in my focus on what lay ahead. At 1:30, I informed Alice that I was leaving for the day and that she could reach me via cell phone if something urgent arose. Just as I was about to step out, she mentioned that Sally had called 4 times that morning. I made no comment and simply walked towards the elevator, keeping my focus on the upcoming meeting. Meeting with Larry Finley, the divorce attorney, went smoothly. He started off by discussing his fees, but soon we moved on to the specifics of my situation. I handed over the evidence I had, the photos and stained underclothes Sally had given me. I didn't elaborate on how I came into possession of those items, I simply stated that Sally was aware I had them. Larry appeared poised to ask for additional details but ultimately restrained himself. The evidence I provided, along with a brief account of Sally's infidelity, was sufficient for him to initiate divorce proceedings based on her adultery. I chose not to mention my own affair with Tina. My hope was to keep that under wraps. If Sally ever brought it up, I could confidently deny it, especially if Tina backed me up. I wanted to believe that Tina would stand by me, allowing us to counter whatever claims Sally might make. As I left the attorney's office, a mix of anxiety and determination bubbled within me. The next chapter awaited, and I had to be ready to face whatever came my way. After our lengthy discussion, I made a decisive request for Larry to file for a restraining order against Sally. This step was necessary to put a definitive boundary between us and to prevent any further attempts on her part to reach out to me. Larry, always quick to respond to my needs, agreed without hesitation. He assured me that he would have all the required paperwork prepared by the following afternoon. Leaving his office, I felt a renewed sense of control wash over me. With the necessary steps now firmly in progress, I felt like I was finally taking charge of the situation. On my way home, I decided to make a brief stop at the office to retrieve a couple of reports I needed to review for the next day's meetings. As I pulled into the driveway from the east side of the building, I caught a glimpse of Sally's van leaving from the north side of the parking lot. Fortunately, she didn't notice me as she merged into traffic and drove away from the office, taking her problems with her. Upon my return, I found Alice surprised to see me back. Earlier, I had mentioned that I would be leaving for the day, and now here I was, back at my desk. I offered no explanation for my sudden change of plans, leaving Alice to wonder what was going on in my life as I packed the reports into my briefcase. Just then, she entered the room holding an envelope, which she informed me was from Sally. Sally had instructed her to deliver it directly to me. I took the envelope and slipped it into my briefcase without opening it. I could tell Alice was curious about the unfolding saga between Sally and me, but she would have to remain in the dark for a little while longer as I left her to speculate. Just as I was about to leave for the day, it occurred to me to check my emails one last time. Upon logging in, I noticed a message from Tina. I opened it and read her words. "Hello Peter, I was pleasantly surprised to receive an email from you after that scorching email I received 2 weeks ago. I was shocked and truly hurt by that email. Now that I know it wasn't you who sent it, I feel very relieved." I noted her empathy regarding my marital issues, which had seemed to escalate because of our past connection. She expressed her regret at the turmoil Sally had caused and assured me that our secret affair would remain just that, secret. Tina ended her email by expressing a desire to reconnect if she was ever in town, leaving me with a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. With Tina's supportive message in hand, I felt more prepared to face any accusations Sally might make during the divorce proceedings. Quickly, I replied to Tina, expressing my gratitude and anticipation of rekindling our friendship in the future. After sending off the response, I deleted both emails to maintain some semblance of privacy. Once outside in the parking lot, I retrieved the envelope that Sally had sent through Alice. I could sense that the contents of this letter would be markedly different from her previous communications. Upon opening it, I was confronted with a more defiant and threatening tone. Gone was the sincerity of her earlier pleas for a conversation. Instead, the letter was laden with demands. "Peter, this will be your last chance. I've tried over the past 2 days to get you to call me and for us to sit down and talk this out. You seem bent on ignoring my calls and throwing me out of our house. Now you can either call me on my cell and arrange a meeting for the two of us, or you will be served with a divorce notice this week. There will not be another chance for us if you do not call me today. Your wife, Sally." Rather than feeling intimidated or upset by her words, a smile crept across my face. The shift from her initial pleas to these threatening tones was striking. Sally was attempting to reclaim some moral high ground, but the threat of divorce felt almost empty considering that I had already signed the note at the bar, essentially marking the end of our relationship. Driving home from the office, my mind buzzed with different scenarios for how to respond to Sally's letter. Ignoring it was certainly an option since the divorce proceedings were already underway and she was currently locked out of the house, placing me in a position of strength. On the other hand, I could opt to arrange a meeting in a public space, having one last face-to-face conversation. Each option played out in my mind as I decided the best course of action. I had decided to take the divorce papers with me, planning to serve them to her during our meeting. As I arrived home, I noticed that there was no van parked in front of the house, which I interpreted as a positive sign. Pulling into the garage, I felt a slight sense of relief when I stepped inside and saw that everything appeared undisturbed. There were no signs indicating that anyone had attempted to enter the house. I couldn't shake the thought that perhaps Sally had considered having a locksmith come in to open the door for her, but maybe that idea hadn't crossed her mind yet. As I glanced at the phone, I noticed the message light was blinking, indicating I had a new voicemail from Sally. Her message was short and to the point. "Peter, I left a note at your office today. I hope you've read it by now. If I don't receive a call from you tonight, I'll have no choice but to go see a divorce lawyer." The simplicity of her message didn't escape me. It felt like she was trying to exert some control, using what she believed was an empty threat to pressure me. After some deliberation, I recognized that meeting her one last time to formally serve her with the divorce papers was the right move. Yet, I decided to have dinner first, allowing her to stew for a little longer in anticipation. As the clock approached 8 p.m., I finally picked up my phone and dialed her number. It rang a few times before I heard her familiar voice answer. I introduced myself, and there was a moment of silence, a brief pause before she responded, expressing surprise that I had actually called. She sarcastically referenced her earlier threat, and I felt a surge of frustration welling up inside me. However, I kept my composure, determined not to let her dictate the tone of the conversation. I acknowledged her point, realizing she had often insisted on wanting to talk about our situation. I then asked her if there was anything significant left for us to discuss. Sally made it clear that she wanted to hear me say, in person, that our marriage was officially over. She didn't want to receive notes or face a cold shoulder. Instead, she wanted the kind of closure that came from a direct conversation, emphasizing the passionate connection we once shared. I agreed to meet her in person, suggesting that we have dinner together at Mario's the following evening. Sally accepted the plan, and we settled on a time, 6:30 p.m. As our call drew to a close, she made a poignant statement, saying that she still loved me. Her declaration lingered in my mind as I considered whether to extend that sentiment further, but logic prevailed. It was time to bring this chapter to a definitive end, to stop playing games. The final act of this tragic situation was set to unfold in less than 24 hours. With that in mind, I began mentally rehearsing what I would say and what I hoped to learn from Sally before officially handing her the divorce papers. In the quiet of the den, with smooth jazz playing gently in the background, I poured myself a glass of Jack Daniels and slowly sipped it, allowing my thoughts to crystallize around the questions and statements I wanted to bring up when we sat across from one another at the restaurant. After about 4 hours of this mental preparation, I decided it was time to get some rest and headed to bed, feeling that I had a solid plan forming in my mind. Surprisingly, sleep came easily, and I felt well rested when I woke up the next morning. The day at the office was predictably busy, filled with the usual tasks and interruptions. Amid the chaos, I made a quick call to Larry Finley's office to check on the status of the divorce papers. They informed me to come by after 4:30 p.m., assuring me that everything would be ready for me then. I arrived at Larry's office just before 5 p.m., and the receptionist informed me that Larry wanted to meet with me to go over the papers and the procedures that would follow after handing them to Sally. It took over 45 minutes for Larry to explain the details of the process I had initiated, highlighting that the final divorce would take at least 3 months after both parties agreed and the papers were filed with the court. Having received this critical information, I left Larry's office around 6 p.m. The drive from there to Mario's was a quick one, taking approximately 15 minutes, which allowed me to arrive on time for my scheduled meeting with Sally. Upon entering the restaurant, I was greeted by a young lady at the seating station, who welcomed me with a warm smile. My ego momentarily swelled with the belief that she was impressed by me, and her smile seemed to confirm that notion. I reciprocated with a charming smile of my own and asked if she had already seated Sally Harper. However, her smile faded slightly at my question, and in that instant, a mix of anticipation and uncertainty washed over me. Her smile faded slightly as she gestured for me to follow her, leading me to the table where Sally sat. The first glimpse I had of her was striking. Her presence filled the space with an undeniable energy. We approached, and just as Sally looked up to see us, I greeted her with a simple, yet warm, "Hello, Sally." As I settled into my chair across from her, she responded, "Hello, Peter. Don't I get a kiss tonight?" The playful remark reminded me of our earlier encounter at the bar on Saturday, where her teasing had been both charming and disarming. I replied, "That hasn't been decided yet," my tone light yet hinting at an underlying edge. The moment the words left my mouth, I could sense the change in her demeanor. Sally immediately shifted into high alert, her confidence momentarily shaken. She had always believed that her beauty and charm were enough to navigate through any distance between us, but now she faced a challenge. It was clear she needed to recalibrate her approach if she wanted to regain control of the conversation. A waitress approached the table, breaking the tension, and asked if we wanted drinks from the bar. Sally quickly ordered a crisp white wine, while I opted for a double Jack Daniels on the rocks, knowing it would help steady my nerves. Once the waitress had departed with our drink orders, Sally took the lead in initiating the conversation, perhaps preferring to act from a position of strength rather than defensiveness this evening. I was content to let her speak first, eager to hear her thoughts before diving into my own carefully prepared arguments. "I want you to know, Peter, this is not the way I intended for our marital problems to end," she began, her voice steady and devoid of the emotional turmoil that had characterized our earlier discussions. Her words flowed into a slow monologue, as if she were laying the foundation for what I knew was going to be an intense verbal exchange. "You know very well what instigated this entire unfortunate situation. I was merely trying to restore balance so we could rebuild our marriage before moving forward." Her calm exterior seemed almost rehearsed, indicative of the careful strategy she had devised. Just as the waitress returned with our drinks, we both took a moment to savor the first sips. Sally then fixed me with a hard gaze, her expression sharpening as she continued. "I especially dislike being portrayed as the villain in this situation. I acted out of hurt and frustration in response to your involvement with Tina. I hold you responsible for this mess." As her eyes bore into mine, I felt the weight of her accusation, a calculated move aimed at inducing guilt while deflecting scrutiny from her own actions. The waitress came back, interrupting the charged atmosphere to ask if we were ready to order. I seized the moment to request some appetizers and another round of drinks, then signaled to her that we needed some privacy for the next while, wanting no interruptions as I prepared for the impending confrontation. As she walked away, I could sense Sally's quiet anticipation, expecting either an apology or a rebuttal. My gaze remained fixed on her, and I chose to remain silent while finishing off my drink. "So it's entirely my fault?" I challenged, my voice direct and firm, showing no signs of remorse. "There's nothing you've done that deserves any blame, is there?" The question hung in the air, and her response was almost instantaneous. "Yes, Peter, it's entirely your fault. You even attempted to conceal your affair from me, probably so you could continue seeing her and engage in another 4-day escapade." Each word dripped with bitterness, like the venom from an agitated cobra, her anger slowly unfurling. "I only wanted you to see that two can play the same game of marital infidelity. How does it feel now?" With that, our drinks and appetizers arrived, and I told the waitress not to disturb us for the next 15 or 20 minutes. I had no intention of allowing anything to interrupt the flow of my thoughts as I prepared to lay out everything I needed to say. "First of all, Sally, let me tell you that this entire situation makes me sick to my stomach. Yes, I did have an affair with Tina at the resort. I won't deny it to you. My only defense is that I was a victim in that affair, not the one who initiated it. I continued, knowing the truth would add weight to my words. I would have confessed everything and told you exactly how it happened, but now that is irrelevant. Sally opened her mouth to interject, but I quickly silenced her. If you interrupt me again, I'll just get up and leave you sitting here. My body language and tone made it clear that I needed the floor for a moment, that it was my turn to speak without interruption. I say it's irrelevant now because your actions after finding out were uncalled for and highly spiteful. Once you learned about Tina and me, you could have easily confronted me with that knowledge, and you would have had a very repentant husband ready to accept your anger. But you didn't. Instead, you devised this malicious revenge plot that went far beyond just seeking retribution. I watched her carefully, noting the tension in her posture, aware that the ball was now in her court, but I wouldn't back down easily. There were 4 nights during your affair when you could have still confronted me with my wrongdoings and then revealed your own affair just to even the score. Any one of those nights. The silence that followed felt charged, brimming with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. I would have still been the repentant husband, someone capable of empathy who could have even found it within myself to forgive you for the grave mistake I initiated. You mentioned it to me 13 times in just 4 days, boasting about it to me in the bar on Saturday. That figure, 13, has lingered in my mind since then. Why was it necessary for you to exceed that specific and painful number? After all, it was more than just a simple acknowledgement of what had happened between Tina and me. Sally seemed poised to comment on my thoughts, but I halted her, saying, "Not now, Sally. You'll have plenty of time to provide your answers once I finish speaking." I wanted to ensure my voice carried authority and made it clear I was not open to interruptions at that moment. As I continued, I emphasized that the core issue was not solely your desire to balance the scales of our troubled marriage, which would have been difficult enough to accept on its own. I could have understood a tit-for-tat approach, but what confounded me was your decision to go beyond mere parody, especially after the 7th time or even within the span of those 4 days. When you drove us to the club on Saturday, it felt evident that you had more in mind than simple payback. On several occasions, you had mentioned that the outcome of that evening was still uncertain, leaving an unsettling suggestion that we might end up going our separate ways. As I spoke, I watched Sally's expression shift to a stoic, emotionless mask, her face revealing nothing of her inner turmoil or thoughts. The notion that we might not leave together hit me hard, eroding my self-esteem and forcing me to confront an uncomfortable reality. I couldn't help but wonder how we had arrived at this point. My words were chosen carefully, each syllable enunciated with clarity, as I confronted you with the painful truth of your infidelity. You had already confessed to going far beyond the principle of an eye for an eye, so what motivated you to bring me into the horrifying experience of witnessing your betrayal? What drove you to persist with your affair right in front of me? Why did you feel the need to humiliate me so thoroughly with the photographs and the damp underwear that seemed to serve as cruel reminders throughout our 4-year marriage? I had never imagined such a dark side to your personality, a side that craved excessive revenge whenever it felt threatened or wronged. You had always been loving and caring, which made this dramatic shift in your behavior even more difficult to understand. While it may sound like an excuse, the reason I chose not to disclose what transpired between Tina and me at the resort was rooted in my desire to protect you from further pain that my own infidelity had already caused. I sensed Sally's discomfort as she shifted in her seat, yet she remained silent, her eyes giving away nothing about her feelings. The 5th day of this ordeal introduced a new, unsettling element into our already fraught relationship, something that drove you to want to dismantle me completely. To this day, I am still grappling with the significance of that 5th day. It seemed entirely unnecessary to achieve the retribution that you sought for my infidelity. You had already settled your score, mentioning that on the very first day with Dan, you assured him that the affair would last only 4 days, after which you would sever ties with him forever. Therefore, I am left grappling with the pressing question of why you felt compelled to take me to the club on Saturday and instigate a 5th day of extramarital activities with Dan. I paused for a moment, observing Sally as she remained motionless, devoid of emotion or any indication of how she would respond once given the chance. All these questions overwhelmed me, and as you walked away from the table on Saturday, I couldn't fathom the reasoning behind your actions. It didn't make sense to me then, and it still doesn't today. If you are wondering why I chose to leave the club after you went off with your lover, it was simple. I could no longer find any rational explanation for why such profound humiliation was necessary. There seemed to be an underlying motive that transcended my ability to comprehend it logically. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I no longer knew you as well as I thought I did. I had lost the ability to predict your actions or understand your motivations. In that moment, Sally's poker face transformed into one of innocence, reminiscent of a young girl about to confess why she disobeyed her father's orders. She moistened her lips with her tongue, preparing to speak. "I think I understand what you're trying to do here, Peter," she began. "You're trying to shift the blame for our marriage crisis onto me. I won't allow you to do that. You broke your marriage vows first, opening the floodgates. You now find yourself confronted with the repercussions of your choices, and all I seek, Sally, is a clear explanation regarding the significance of the fifth day in your mind. What drove you to take your pursuit of revenge to such extreme lengths? I am not here to assign blame, I merely wish to understand why you felt that the events of that fifth day were necessary to fulfill your desire for vindication." I softened my tone, hoping to encourage a genuine response from her. As I considered my last statement and the questions it raised, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that lingered with me on my journey home. It prompted me to call my mother and share the entire narrative with her. After listening intently to my confession, detailing the events and the turmoil that had engulfed my relationship with Sally, she affirmed that I was right in my pursuit of retribution. However, she insisted that mere retaliation would not suffice. We needed to go further. According to her, I had to impart a serious lesson. This advice hit me like a ton of bricks. It suddenly became clear to me that it was Edith, the mother of Sally, who had orchestrated the events of the fifth day. This revelation struck deep as I realized that the roots of this turmoil could be traced back to a significant falling out I had with Edith about a year and a half ago. She had become unwelcome in my home due to her relentless criticism, her unyielding habit of picking apart everything and everyone. She would declare that nobody could meet her expectations, and this pervasive negativity seeped into all corners of her existence. Fortunately, after marrying Sally, we managed to relocate to a town approximately 250 miles away from Edith, but in my view, even that distance was insufficient to fully escape her influence. Yet, I observed that Sally had a remarkable ability to brush off her mother's disparaging remarks about both me and our life together. A couple of years back, however, Edith's constant complaints became unbearable for Sally's father, leading to him leaving her. Several months following their divorce, Edith visited us for the first time since the separation. During that visit, I endured her persistent nagging for as long as I could, but ultimately, I reached my breaking point. I unleashed a torrent of pent-up frustration and made it abundantly clear that I found her insufferable and that I never wanted her in my house again. While my outburst caused Sally considerable distress, she chose to stand by me. Following that incident, Edith departed and never returned to my home. It became glaringly apparent to me that the revenge of the fifth day was not something Sally had concocted on her own, it was a misguided plan stemming from her mother's influence. I had initially failed to consider Edith's role in the events surrounding the fifth day, but all the pieces now began to fall into place. While Sally tried to explain her motivations, my attention shifted to the specifics of her words. She recounted how her mother had made sweeping statements about men, declaring that all men were cheating, lying lowlives, and that we couldn't be trusted when out of their sight. Sally had recounted how her mother reminded her of my own father's abandonment. This planted a seed of doubt in her mind, suggesting that I, too, would inevitably follow suit and leave her in a couple of years. Sally paused, seemingly assessing my reaction to her words, and I could feel my expression shift dramatically upon learning about her phone call with her mother. She continued, explaining how her mother had instructed her to return the next day and engage with Dan once more. This was not just a casual suggestion, it was part of a meticulous plan that had been crafted with great detail, demonstrating that a considerable amount of thought had gone into it. Sally also mentioned that her mother had discussed sharing photographs that Dan had taken of our activities, just before she was set to leave for another encounter with him. After she finished speaking, she leaned back, seemingly satisfied that her explanation had adequately answered my question. It felt like a further attempt to distance herself from accountability. Initially, it was all my fault, and now it had shifted to being her mother's fault. Sally appeared to be trying to absolve herself of any responsibility in this situation. While it was true that Edith's influence was significant, Sally was not a helpless child who had no choice but to heed her mother's directives. She was an adult with free will, and more importantly, my wife who actively engaged in deeply humiliating actions in public. Now that the reason behind the fifth day was clear, I had no intention of letting Sally off the hook. Sally was clearly trying to sidestep any accountability in this situation, eager to retain her image of innocence while shifting the blame onto others. It was evident that she wanted to brush past the crisis we were facing, as if it was solely the responsibility of everyone else involved. However, I was not prepared to let her evade that responsibility so easily. I looked at her intently, aware that I needed to speak with clarity and purpose. "So, is it Edith's fault that for the fourth and fifth days you showed absolutely no interest in participating?" I asked, giving her a moment to absorb the question. As Sally nodded in agreement, it became clear that her reluctance had less to do with genuine feelings and more to do with her mother's influence. "You weren't truly invested in those encounters with another man, as you mentioned before, correct?" I continued, noting her emphatic nod that confirmed my suspicion. "It was your mother's desire to see me punished that swayed your decisions, wasn't it?" Another nod. Frustration began to boil within me as I recognized Sally's refusal to accept any portion of the blame for what had transpired. Her readiness to align with her mother's vindictive plan to completely devastate my life was infuriating. It was as if she wanted to evade accountability for all the humiliation I had endured during this ordeal. As I reflected on all the incidents that transpired at the bar and in the days that followed, a deep anger settled in. Throughout this whole situation, I had seen no sign of remorse or regret from her. Instead, she clung tightly to her narrative of innocence, pushing all culpability onto her mother and onto me. "You're a damn liar, Sally," I exclaimed, my voice rising enough to draw the attention of several onlookers who turned in our direction. Her face flushed red with embarrassment, and I could see her struggling for a retort, but I pressed on before she could gather her thoughts. "It was me you took to that bar last Saturday. It was me who faced your public degradation and humiliation. It was me who had to endure the repercussions of those incriminating photos you shared. Despite your attempts to wash your hands of any wrongdoing, Sally, I was right there. I heard the hurtful words you used to belittle me, to utterly shame me. I recall vividly the tone of your voice when you suggested that you might not return home with me. All the implications and the veiled threats toward our marriage were conveyed clearly in your voice. This wasn't your mother speaking, it was you." Sally's actions were far from those of someone merely playing a role, they were the calculated moves of a malicious woman fueled by her own need for revenge. Perhaps it had started as a scheme devised by her mother, but when the moment arrived for action, it was all her. Sally's concealed anger, her determination to humiliate me, and her infidelity were glaringly evident. This is why I believed our relationship was irreparably broken. Her facade of love had always hidden deep-seated resentment, an outcome of her upbringing under her bitter mother's influence. "You're a hypocrite," I added, my words dripping with disdain. "You wanted everything to unfold this way. I'm certain that if I had simply waited for your return, you would have insisted on the freedom to continue seeing Dan at your whim." There had been no signs of remorse from her actions at the bar or in anything she had done since. She might have thought she had the upper hand, that she understood me completely, but the reality was that she was utterly clueless. "Now that I've tasted what another man has to offer," she shot back venomously, "Dan won't be the only one sharing my bed." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the divorce papers, watching her gaze widen in realization. "I don't care to hear your side anymore, Sally," I declared, my tone resolute. "Here are the divorce papers that will set you free to pursue any man you desire from this point forward. Along with that, there's a restraining order prohibiting any contact with me in any form. You can't call me, see me, or come near my home. If you do, I'll have you arrested, and you'll spend some time behind bars." Rising from my seat, I made it clear I was done for good. Sally stood there, momentarily speechless as I slid the paperwork across the table toward her. "Oh, and one last thing," I added as I retrieved a pre-addressed envelope and placed it in front of her. "You can use this to let me know your new address. I've arranged for movers to come this weekend to pack up the rest of your belongings. Everything will be stored until you tell me where to send it." I left two $20 bills on the table, a final gesture as I turned to leave her behind. As I turned to leave the tense atmosphere of the room, Sally's voice rang out forcefully, piercing the air with her accusation, "You damn bastard. I'll show you who walks out on whom." The immediate reaction of everyone present was to shift their attention toward her outburst. In that moment, I offered a simple smile, a gesture meant to convey my indifference, and mouthed the word "salt" silently, carrying with it a weight of meaning I only understood. This unexpected train of thought made its way to the forefront of my mind, reminding me of something I had once read: "To predict what your wife would be like in 25 years, one should observe her mother closely today." This notion sparked a wry smile on my face, as I realized that in just 4 years, I had witnessed enough of Sally's true character, one that simmered beneath the surface, marked by resentment and bitterness. It felt like a fortunate discovery to unearth the reality of her nature now, rather than facing a more profound revelation in a decade or 15 years down the line, just as the saying went, like mother, like daughter. When the divorce proceedings began, they unfolded with relative ease, marked by only one significant point of contention. During a crucial moment in the courtroom, the judge directed a question at Tina, inquiring whether there had ever been an affair between us. Staying true to her word, Tina firmly denied any such indiscretion. Her vehement denial was convincing enough to sway the judge in her favor. However, the atmosphere shifted dramatically when Sally lost her composure, erupting in a fit of anger that put the judge in a position to contemplate charging her with contempt of court. After that day in court, I haven't crossed paths with Sally. It's been nearly 3 years since we finalized our divorce, and that chapter of my life closed. In the time since, I have chosen to remain single. I frequently go on dates with various women, enjoying the company each offers. However, as soon as I sense a budding relationship might be taking a serious turn, I tend to make a suggestion about meeting their mothers after a couple of casual dinner dates. This practice has become somewhat of a personal rule for me. Through these encounters with both mothers and daughters, I've often come to realize that maintaining my bachelor status is indeed the more favorable path. Wherever you are, Sally, I find myself grateful for the valuable lesson you've imparted, one that continues to influence my choices today.